WWT presents Experts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of WWT Experts. I'm your host, Matthew Coble, as usual, and today I'm delighted to introduce two experts from Worldwide Technology in this episode of our four-part series on energy and utility industry and how organizations in that space are approaching topics like artificial intelligence, operational technology, security, and today's topic, lifecycle management. With me today are Adam Nathan, who leads Worldwide Technology's energy and utility practice, and he's worked with our clients on business and technology strategies for well over 8 years. I've gotten to know him. I've found him to be highly analytical and intellectually curious guy, and he's really passionate about modernizing the energy and utility industries to achieve those transformational business results, but also good societal outcomes, and I admire that. Joining us as well is David Tunks, who is a director of the global PMO at Worldwide Technology. He's been with us a little bit over 8 years and has 20 years of experience working primarily with energy and utility companies on distribution systems, control systems, enterprise architectures, technology solutions, and really all the technologies it takes to run business in these industries. And he's joining us today from his home in Colorado. Gentlemen, welcome. Nice to have you here.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's jump in. So to open up, just level set a little bit and tell us about asset lifecycle management in the utility industry and the energy industry today. What's the current state and what are organizations thinking about?
Yeah, it is as important as ever, right? It is needed to have a digitized grid. We need better visibility into what's going on on the grid with electrification of cars and greater needs around AI and driven data centers. The demand for power, it just keeps growing and growing and growing. While we add renewable power resources that are volatile in nature. The sun's not always shining, the wind's not always blowing. And so we need to be able to manage this increase in volatility on both sides. And the biggest challenge there is that understanding current state and being able to react really quickly requires incredible granularity and visibility and control on the grid. But these grids cover, for individual utilities, can be tens of thousands of square miles with hundreds of thousands or millions of assets, and that means having modern technology out there that exists across that entire service territory is really expensive and hard to do. We're used to you put out a power pole, a big wooden pole, and it sits there for decades and decades and decades. You can't do that with a router or a firewall, right? We're living lives where our personal technology is changing faster than ever, and the grid is not used to changing that quickly, but it has to. And functionally making that happen, actually getting that refresh out there to get modern technology out on the poles and in substations and on the homes and businesses, that requires a scalable asset management lifecycle process and programs that has never really been needed at this scale before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to add to that, the demand that's getting placed on the IT organizations, the OT organizations within these utilities, with the growth that's there. In the past, historically, with all the new technology, there hasn't been the kind of demand and the sheer number of assets on the networks. And because of that growth and that demand, you can no longer just kind of power through and manhandle your refresh. The need for a programmatic approach to be very thoughtful and purposeful in how you go into it is critical for success in that area.
Yeah, we'll talk just a little bit. It seems like the organizations in this vertical really have lots of different unique challenges that they face, and probably some other verticals can learn from them because of the complexity here of the geographies and so forth that we're talking about. So what are some of those key challenges, and therefore what are the benefits of taking more of that programmatic approach to lifecycle management?
From my perspective, and you're right, by the way, the utility has specific requirements, compliance issues, but for the most part, this issue with refresh programs is consistent through multiple verticals. Some of the challenges that they have today are data quality and data management. There's a lot of organizations that quite simply don't know everything that they have on their network. And we're talking not just routers and switches, but, across compute, storage, wireless access points, then into the OT side of the world. And so it's really challenging for organizations to be able to put together a programmatic approach if they don't know what it is that they're looking to refresh on their network. And so these challenges, they manifest themselves in having devices that end up being on the network beyond end of life, end of service, exposure for cybersecurity risk, downtime, and then obviously additional OpEx, which is a key critical factor for utilities in terms of minimizing OpEx and trying to maximize their use of CapEx. So all of those are challenges that they have that a programmatic ALMP, asset lifecycle management program, can help address.
Yeah, and I'd say it all starts with actually knowing what's out there, right? And so that is definitely a foundational challenge that many haven't needed to know historically. When the model has been run it till it dies, and when it dies, we'll go fix it, right? They're not proactively putting out new poles everywhere just because it's been 5 or 10 years. They wait until there's erosion or there's a reason to do it, and then they go replace it. That's not how technology works. And it's not just that the device will fail. It can be that it's more prone to cybersecurity threats. And some of these assets, when they go down, you have to shut the grid down because the network's not there. You don't have the visibility to know that it's safe and that it's high quality power. So getting the data right is definitely foundational, and then planning it. I think that when you look at like a retailer, in a lot of situations, they want to have the same experience in every location. So they'll go do a massive one-time refresh every 5 years or so of the network in every store. And it's a massive effort that one time. For utilities, given the CapEx model, they want to refresh, they want to have consistent capital spend. So getting a relatively consistent technology base and architecture into the field without that big bang effort every few years is really challenging. It means getting it right every year and hitting your 20% a year or 15% a year or 25% a year, depending on the depreciation cycle, sometimes even 10. It means actually hitting that every year, dealing with the fluctuations in capital availability year to year, and then also dealing with the environment, right? You look at California, they don't have 12 months a year to go do this. They have 10 because wildfire season exists for a couple of months a year, and they have to be on patrol and ready for that. Same thing, hurricane season in the Southeast. These situations are getting worse, and so more has to be done and condensed into a shorter amount of time. And the number of assets included in these programs continues to grow exponentially. So getting it right now is really critical.
Well, tell us, if you would, whether it's a client of Worldwide Technology or just others you see out in the marketplace, tell us about a success story or two with lifecycle management, and what were those keys to success that we've seen?
So we worked with a number of large public utilities, and typically the story is always the same: is, hey, we want to get on a 5-year refresh cycle. We want to keep our technology current. But because of all the things we've already kind of touched on around, they don't have effective data, so they don't know what is that easy to refresh. The budgeting cycle from a CapEx perspective, it presents a challenge. So where we've worked with these utilities is to come in and try to get our arms around, well, what are the fundamental challenges that they're facing in solving for this, right? How do we help them get to where they want to get to? And in a couple of examples, we've started with smaller pilots, right? One of the biggest challenges I think we have is getting an organization to really buy in and understand what is required to be successful for a programmatic approach in a asset lifecycle management program. So getting senior leader buy-in, getting the process and procedures put in place, the accountability put in place to be successful, and then biting off, if you would, a small piece of what they're trying to accomplish. That allows you to establish process and lessons learned as you go through that, so that you can then start to scale that. And that's how we started with a number of our large utilities, where if you flash back to one specific utility 10 years ago or so, we were maybe doing 5, 6, 7%, or I'm sorry, they were maybe doing 5, 6, 7% of their entire asset refresh when they needed to get to 20%. So when you're supposed to be doing 20 and you're only doing 5, you're falling further behind each year that you get into it. And so WWT came in and we helped set up a programmatic approach to start to ramp that up. And over the course of the last decade or so, we have got them to the point where they are now current. They have no technology debt or very little technology debt. Their budgeting cycle is in par with what they need. They're not having to go back and ask for more money. Their reliability has gone up. So there's a number of positive outcomes that have come from implementing this. Doesn't happen overnight, a lot of hard work, but if you have that initial part with the process, procedure, vision, the buy-in across the organization, you can get there. And that's what we've helped organizations do.
Yeah, it's utility space. Nothing happens overnight, except the grid's got to keep running. But we have a whole bunch. We have another customer, another utility that we're working with right now, where they're at the beginning of that journey. We're talking to them about their policy has been run it till it dies, and 30, 40, in some areas, 50+% of their assets are end of life or end of support, and that was optimizing use of capital originally, right? That was a good thing. It was seen as, hey, the reliability was okay and the spend was controlled. I think now, as we see the technology evolving so much, that having that foundation be so old means we don't have the right applications. We don't have the foundation to put the right applications out there. We don't have the scale of the infrastructure of the network, of the storage and compute to be able to actually execute the kind of monitoring and operations that we need in the business, and the reliability of that system is degrading because it's getting to that point where it's too old, and now the spend is out of control, but completely. There's no way to forecast it because you don't know what's going to break that year, and you're not prepared for it. In addition, you're dealing with a lot of people retiring in this industry, so you're losing a lot of that tribal knowledge, those people that just know what's out there in that substation because they built it 25 years ago and it hasn't changed. And they know who to go to get the right of way to get into that location because that's how they've always done it for a couple of decades, and they know that person. And right, those are challenges that our customers are running into with those people retiring, and then they're having to go find people that know really old systems. I was in a customer's network lab a few months ago. They have a network set up from literally 35 years ago. This technology was first put out there, and they still have a couple of those out there. They have to keep training their staff on that technology because it exists in their environment. And when it goes down, that's a problem. And part of that, and so being able to get out there and refresh that lowers the administrative costs, lowers the complexity of running your environment, as well as steps up your capability. I think all of that is now being seen by this utility I was mentioning earlier that is pivoting from a run it till it dies to now let's be more proactive and get to the latest and greatest over the next 5 to 7 years. And but that's starting at the top because the incentive or the vision before was different. It was make the most out of the capital we spend and we're going to try to be as efficient as possible in that way. And now the vision has changed. So I think there's a bottoms up approach of let's pick a project and that's particularly at risk or is problematic. Or in one of the examples I know David worked on, there was a massive regulatory bill coming due if they didn't get a refresh done quickly. And so that was the impetus to get started and show what good looks like. But so whatever that first project is, you can do that, sort of show what good looks like and then expand. The alternative is the leadership can put a stake in the ground and say that we are shifting from a run it till it dies to a proactive asset lifecycle management program style approach. And we're going to retool and think differently about processes that we've done for a long time, and that inertia to change is not insignificant.
Well, I imagine that some of the factors driving this are creating some new sources of data, improving data quality, the efficiency of data gathering, visibility that brings, and another thing happening, of course, is using that data to be positioned to power artificial intelligence, in the near future, the distant future within the industry. So how are those factors playing into the lifecycle decisions that organizations are making? Are those the key factors, or are there other things that play too?
Those are definitely meaningful, right? They are. You can't. You're only as good with AI and all the capabilities we know we need and that are advancing so quickly. You're only as good as the data that you have. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have, if your network is not modern enough and capable enough to pull down data from every substation, every transmission substation, and the larger distribution ones on a very regular basis, or you can't read the meter more than once a day, there's going to be a limit to how much you can do to actually optimize the operations and use these new modern capabilities. But I would say the other side of it, the other thing that they're looking at is reliability for the solutions that already exist is massive, right? We're talking about a grid that can't go down or that has significant detrimental impacts to society at large. And it's also cybersecurity. There are more bad actors in the world today than there ever have been, more attempts at breaking in and taking down these kinds of organizations than ever before. And we have to balance, we have to be digitizing, but that just increases our attack surface. So we need to be able to do this digitization in a way that is cyber secure. You can't do that with a 35-year-old network. Right? There's certain things you absolutely can't do. So balancing the reliability of the stuff that has always run and needs to keep running with being able to put modern technology out there and maintain cybersecurity throughout all of it is a tightrope to walk, but that is the responsibility of utility leadership today. Mm-hmm.
This episode is brought to you by NetScout, guardians of the connected world that assures digital business services against disruptions in availability, performance, and security. See across any network, any data center, any cloud, 5G, and more. That's the power of visibility without borders.
My next question for you, both of you, is, and David, maybe we lead with you. So imagine we're talking with, a new client in this space. We're going to meet with their executive team. What are the 2 or 3 things that you're telling them in that initial conversation about the importance of this work, and also what are they worried about? What are what pitfalls do they see, and how do you kind of talk them through that to get them to see those priorities and move forward?
So I think in most of the conversations that I've had, and in conversations with Adam that he's had, most executives understand the issue and the challenge. They understand the risk. They understand the challenges that they have or operationalizing a major refresh program. So getting most utility executives to understand the need isn't really the challenge. It's solving for those challenges that's the real conversation point. And so the ability for them to have visibility into their CapEx spend is a major point for them, right? I mean, it's all about reducing OpEx and increasing CapEx. So if you can talk to them about having a view to the next 5 years of what their capital requirements are going to be, that's very critical. Also taking a look at their technology, the actual architecture that they have. So all things that Adam just talked about in terms of the growth of the data that's being produced and that's required, the size of the networks that are growing, that has to be managed. And again, you can't do that on seriously dated technology. So the ability to consolidate and efficiently put together a new architecture that solves for their problems, that's an issue and a challenge for the executives. And then I would say for a third one, it would be around how do they get their organization that's been doing something one way for the last how many ever years? And as Adam stated, there's a lot of retiring going on. There's a transition in the workforce. And yet a lot of the processes that they're still following have been around for a long time. So we talk to them about the need for them to be visible in the organization, talk about the vision of what they're trying to accomplish, why they're trying to accomplish it, and then get the buy-in throughout the organization. I think those are 3 key points that we talk to executives about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think, as my mom always said, your greatest strength is also your greatest weakness. I truly believe that. And in this case, one of the greatest strengths of utilities is that the people are passionate and they will do what it takes to get the job done. And that has covered up a lot of bad process and issues over the years. with people retiring, trouble attracting new talent, trying to drive costs down, and that cost coming from having too many people doing manual work, and even retention of people that exist today. So it's too often that in order to get the capital spent by the end of the year, utilities are taking architect quality folks and having them configuring routers and switches in November so that the field teams can go deploy them in December, and they're burning out working 16-hour days to get this stuff out the door because they didn't have, because they didn't have the annual plan. There was a worse than expected hurricane season. And there's a million reasons why this happens, but it seems, it almost feels to a lot of utilities, the folks on the ground floor, as well as leadership, like they're on a treadmill they can't get off of. It just keeps every year, right? They miss that target. And instead of using Q4, the end of the year to start planning the next year, they have their best people configuring routers and switches, doing technician level work to try to hit that year's target, and they can never get ahead of it. So I think that's really where when we talk to leaders in this space, it really is about what's the best way to stem the tide for you? Is it, like David mentioned earlier, let's pick a program where there's a specific need, a specific, we have to answer the question, why now? It's not been perfect for a long time. Why go figure it out right now? Let's pick an area where that's a problem, or we're seeing in that other example I spoke to, it's a brand new CIO that's come in and he's taking a look at everything. And so he's bringing with him a new vision for what their approach and sort of their overall operational approach should be. You sort of need to figure out how to, where to start because I think it's ultimately it's just getting worse and worse each year.
Yeah. Well, if I build on that, I'm curious whether it's better in these contexts to start with kind of smaller pilot programs, or given the long time horizons here, to really do thorough planning and just move ahead with the full rollout from the get-go. How do you counsel clients around that?
It really comes down to, there's no one perfect thing that works at every utility. Some of this is cultural, and what's the size of their team? How do they operate today? What would that change impact? The other thing is, do they have major programs starting soon? Are they looking to go from, a few years back, it was big push from TDM networks to MPLS and packet-based. That was a major program where there was a need to get off of the TDM technology because it was going end of life. And for the parts of these networks, if that network goes down, the grid shuts off. Like if it's 15-minute outage, the grid turns off for all of us. That was critical enough to get people to say, hey, we can't miss these deadlines. This can't be a 5-year rollout that turns into 10, which is we've seen many times. In that situation, let's think about this process from day one and redefine it and go into this major program with a broader scope. Alternatively, it could be, man, we missed our target last year. If we do it again for this subset of maybe a couple hundred devices out in the field, there's a regulatory penalty to pay. Let's figure that out and make sure let's just get this right. And if we can learn from it, great. And maybe we can start to apply that elsewhere. I think it's finding that reason to change and really get you to move the inertia, to get rid of that inertia. It's going to be different based on where the life cycle is for each of the customers and for each utility, where their leadership's mind is at and organizational structure. But there's a bunch of ways it can be done very successfully.
Mm-hmm. And just to piggyback on that, the latter piece where Adam was talking about, going ahead and doing a small pilot or smaller program just to kind of get the ball moving. We had an example of a utility where they had around 120 devices they wanted to refresh in a year. They got to October and had refreshed about 19 or 20 of them. And that was an opportunity then to step in and say, well, hey, let's go ahead and do a pilot because we really need to get these refreshed. Obviously, at our current rate, we're not going to get there. And we were able to come in and refresh the balance of all of those devices in about 6 weeks before the end of the year. And it did a couple of things. Obviously, it was good for WWT from a pilot standpoint, but it also showed their organization that, this can be done. This is not an impossible task to get all these devices refreshed in the time frame that's required if we have a programmatic approach to that. And that has then grown into a much more substantial program for us, and expanded well beyond the devices that we worked on that year.
Well, David, I love that story in part because I think back to some of our best partners in that account in that utility that we work with every day now, and that we have continued to build this program and get better and better every year. They almost were like laughing at the idea of getting the last 100 done in 6 weeks. And it was like, there really is a belief, like this is just not possible to do better and more at scale. So we're just going to keep doing it and the way we're doing it, and finding a way to make believers out of folks who have been mired in the challenges of this. Again, great folks work really hard to try to get it done. They just haven't seen it most of the time. They've been there for decades. They haven't seen it any differently. Finding that opportunity to make believers out of folks and then bring them along. I think it's very similar to trying to get adoption of new technology. We talk about AI, finding folks to get some momentum with and then bring it to the rest of the organization. It's change, which is hard, but you got to go find early wins that are meaningful and take it from there.
All right, gentlemen, for a utility that has an asset lifecycle management program in play, what are the metrics of success that they're measuring, and then what are the tools they're using for those analytics to make sure that they're monitoring that success over time?
So there's a number of different metrics, and it does depend on utility to utility in terms of what they're actually trying to measure and gauge their success by. But some of the common themes through that are, how many devices do we have? What percent of our network is end of life, and what is current? Mm-hmm. And then another one would be, what percentage of our capital budget is actually being utilized and not carried over? We run into it quite a bit where organizations have capital budgets that are approved for a refresh program, as an example, and then you get to the end of the year, and for all the reasons that we've been talking about for the last how many ever minutes it's been, there's a lot of money left over, and a lot of times they lose that. So it's a use it or lose it. And so now, not only do they have money that they weren't able to capital money that they weren't actually to put in useful life, but they are now further behind in their refresh program, so they need to go back and get more capital the next year to complete that. So they look at the capital utilization. They also look at things like depreciation, like how long is the asset in useful life. They look at things like outages, like what are our percentage of outages, how often do we go down, any risk or cyber attacks, things that we've had. So they're just trying to monitor, at the end of the day, is my network reliable? Is it current? And can it be easily maintained and supported going forward? I think those are some key things. As far as the tools, there's a number of different tools out there, and I don't know that there's one right tool to do the monitoring and the data analysis. I think there's several tools that can do that. Back to an earlier conversation we had, and I think Adam talked to it, it's more about the quality of the data that the tool is using, right? So it's garbage in, garbage out if you don't have all the data that you need to manage it. So first, it's around getting the data solidified, current, accurate, trustworthy, so you have a single source of truth. And then from there, whichever tool you choose, you can utilize for the purposes of planning and execution.
Yeah, one of the other things I think I agree with all of that, and I would add, looking at what is your OpEx budget related to supporting that end of life gear every year, right? It's most utilities capitalize the support purchased with assets, and they'll buy the number of years tied to the depreciation cycle of that asset. If you're running that product, if you're running that asset beyond its depreciation cycle, and oftentimes that means beyond its beyond its end of life, end of support date, now you're paying, if it's a critical asset, you're paying for renewals or extensions on that support contract, which is now an operational expense. And that really turns the financial model of the network or the infrastructure, the technology infrastructure, upside down for the utility. So looking at everything that David mentioned around percentage of assets, end of life or end of support, the portion of capital successfully spent in a given year, layering in performance like compliance fines or outage number of outages related to quality of the actual systems themselves. And then this added piece of the OpEx that you're incurring because you didn't get there and yet you still need support. Say if you build that set of data, then you really get a comprehensive look at the impact of how well you're doing and the impact of not getting it right.
All right, well, last question for both of you. We're talking about sort of longer life cycles with this work with these clients. I'm curious, as you look ahead into the future, what new technologies are you excited to see out in the landscape that are relevant? And how do you counsel clients to, get on with the work they need to do today, but keep in mind those new technologies that you're excited about going forward?
It is something we talk about all the time, especially on the OT side of the business. We're having conversations right now with a customer who's trying to figure out, is it the right time for us to virtualize a lot of our substation operations and systems and go from physical relays to virtual relays and software-based RTUs, and as well as virtualizing route switch and firewalls and so much else that's there, because there's a reason we've done it in the rest of our infrastructure, the data center and in our offices and so forth, right? There is a good value to be had there. However, when you deploy something into a substation like that, your goal is to not touch it for at least 5 and maybe 10 years, right? I imagine buying a phone and saying, I'm going to have this phone in 2034, right? It is very hard to do. And that's not even the worst. The next generation of smart meters that they'll put out have to live for 15 years, and it's going to take 5 to 10 to deploy it. So that's a 20-year life cycle for 25 years for that kind of technology. These are the kinds of decisions that leaders have to make. And they have to make them knowing they have no idea what life will really look like as we get closer to these carbon neutrality goals and 2035, 2045 in California, it's by 2045. Being able to deploy those efficiently and effectively and quickly hastens the life cycle down the road. It gets you to the point where your technology is more easily operatable, and you always are going to have to live with a multi-generational environment. But being able to execute on asset lifecycle management allows you to have more confidence in your ability to quickly get to the next generation or effectively get to the next generation if and when the time comes.
Yeah, I agree with everything Adam said. I just want to highlight one thing. We talked about this idea of going to a site every 5 years or 10 years. A big part of the asset lifecycle management program is really trying to ultimately drive towards, especially utility industry, a site-centric approach, right? So you go out to a substation and they may have a router and a switch and an AP and some OT and maybe a firewall or whatever it might be. And we've had numerous occasions where we'll visit the same substation multiple times in a year because we'll go out and refresh a router switch, or the utility themselves will be doing it, and then they go out and refresh a wireless access point and a firewall, whatever it is. So bringing all that technology together, the goal is to try to go visit that site one time every 5 years or whatever that refresh cycle is that the utility is trying to accommodate. And there's conversation around, well, if I have a switch, as an example, that's, say, 3 years old, I've got 2 years of maintenance left on it and 2 more years left of depreciation on it, why would I want to do that? But when you start to actually do the math and approach it from a programmatic standpoint, you can actually see that the cost of the truck roll, if this substation happens to be very far out in your territory, that extra visit and all the CRQ process that goes along with getting clearance to go out there, that you may be better off taking that one switch that goes end of service or end of life in 2 years, refreshing it at the same time you refresh the other gear, so you don't have to go back out there. So you have that same group of technologies in the same life cycle going forward. And ultimately, you can save money doing that because, again, you eliminate a lot of the operational cost, as well as, in most cases with the OEM, you can get a credit for the maintenance that you haven't used.
And in that scenario, right, just like the retailers I mentioned earlier that want to get consistency throughout every location, we're never going to get there with utilities where every single substation looks exactly the same. But you can have more consistency where it is all the same generation, it is all the same of technology, so it has the right capabilities to run the set of applications that can work on that infrastructure, and then you're upgrading the whole thing at once, as opposed to, and then maintenance becomes easier. And then the next round of refresh becomes easier because you know what's there. You're not having to go roll a truck to make sure what is in the system is actually right. And when you go to deploy an application onto that infrastructure or do something new, you're confident that, yes, this system can handle that. And so it just makes everything you're doing on top of that infrastructure more scalable, as well as the maintenance and management of that infrastructure.
Well, gentlemen, excellent session today. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for joining us as well. If you enjoyed this session, please check out the other 3 we've got in this series on artificial intelligence, operational technology and security, and the energy and utility space. Those 3, this one, lots more out there on WWT.com/events. You can watch episodes when they drop or anytime on demand at your leisure. So check that out. Always enjoy getting some feedback from you, so please take that survey, drop us an email, let us know how we did. And with that, we will wrap today's session, and we will see you next time. Thanks for joining.